everybody. I just want to say thank you for coming out in celebration of our Alumni Achievement Award that we're announcing tonight. This award was initiated by the Alumni Circle Committee to recognize accomplished alums up to 20 years out of graduation. The award is chosen by the committee in collaboration with the artist in resident and, of course, our director, Reed Kroloff. One thing that's really great about this award is the alums come back to campus. In addition to doing the lecture tonight, they work with the department to do critiques and visits with the students. And this is really important because it bridges that gap. It bridges this relationship between students and alums, which is something that we're really striving to do. So with that, I'm very pleased to present the award, or present Reed Kroloff, who will be presenting the award to Susan York. Thanks, Reed.
Maxine's stool is here. Oh, yeah. All right, well, here's something I never thought I would do in front of an audience. Yeah, reading glasses. Reading glasses, it's a terrible thing. Thank you all for joining us. As Allison said, we're very excited to be here tonight to give out the second Alumni Achievement Award. The Alumni Circle came up with this idea almost 2 years ago now, and it was just such an exceptional thought that we would be able to recognize someone who I guess you could sort of describe as in the first half of their career, but as you heard mentioned, up to 20 years after they've graduated from Cranbrook, people who've gone on to an exceptionally distinguished career. And we certainly have that with us tonight. And as part of this, I'm going to do two things. First of all, I'm going to read the letter that we send to the awardee, in this case, Susan York, and then I'll introduce Susan, and we'll leave this letter up here with you so that you'll have a copy of it. So here's what we said. Dear Susan, on behalf of Cranbrook Academy of Arts Alumni Circle, please accept my congratulations on becoming the Academy's second Alumni Achievement Award winner. I cannot think of anyone more deserving of this honor. As its name implies, this distinction is intended to recognize achievement by an Academy graduate in the first half of their career. You are being honored for your remarkable record as both an artist and an educator. We applaud the important critical attention your work has received, including prestigious fellowships from the Joan Mitchell Foundation and Albert Foundation. Further, we congratulate you on leading the excellent sculpture program at Santa Fe University of Art and Design. This recognition also confirms the Academy's pride in its alumni and our desire to highlight their accomplishments. We will announce this honor to alumni, members of the Cranbrook Educational Community's governing boards, and of course the local and national press. The Alumni Circle is a committee of Cranbrook Academy of Art Board of Governors and includes alumni, governors, administrators, and friends of the Academy among its members. The Alumni Circle proposes candidates for the Alumni Achievement Award at the beginning of the calendar year, subject to the approval of the Academy's director. You were selected from an impressive list of graduates, all of whom have distinguished careers, and we congratulate you. Of course, your work reflects very well on the Academy, and we are truly appreciative of that honor. Thank you for all you have done to support this institution, and also for the many exciting things we can expect to see as you move forward in your career. Again, congratulations. Applaud now. Now I'd like to tell you just a little bit about Susan, and then she's going to come up and tell us about her work. Since graduating from Cranbrook Ceramics Department in 1995, Susan York has had an exceptional career, whether receiving the Joan Mitchell Foundation fellowship that I described or finding her work collected across the United States and Europe. Susan has embodied the role of an exemplary professional artist. She has also been a dedicated educator, teaching for nearly 15 years at Santa Fe University of Art and Design, where she now heads the sculpture department. Her graphite sculpture and drawings inspire rapt attention. Their dark, mysterious depths seem to belie apparently solid materiality. Writing about York's work in artforum.com, Washington Post critic Blake Gopnik wrote, You can't just look at her columns. You need to discover that they are made of solid graphite. Her works are not so much about the space they take up as the substance this space contains and what it means. Throughout the past decade, York has lectured at a variety of institutions, including Harvard, New York University, and the School of Art Institute of Chicago. She recently completed a collaborative drawing poetry project with the poet Arthur Say that will result in a 2013 publication by Radius Books. Susan will be in residence this spring at the U-Cross Foundation in Clermont, Wyoming. Exhibitions of her work are also scheduled this year in Munich, Germany, and Milan, Italy. Please help me welcome our honoree, Susan York.
Hi. I'm waiting for the image to come up. Well, thanks a lot. This really means a lot to me. Coming to Cranbrook later in my, having had a studio career for a few years before I came, it had a huge impact on me, and it helped me really find the center of what my vision was in a way that I hadn't been able to do without it, actually, with my undergrad and several years of studio practice. So every time I come back to do crits, today, the last 2 days I've had the honor to be in the ceramics department on one-on-ones and in group critiques with the students, and it's just so inspiring to see the level of work and the level of thinking and the level of angst and how it gets you to the center sometimes. So this really means a lot to me, and to be back at Cranbrook, and to also see the department in the able hands of Anders Ruwald, who's continuing to take the program to really important heights and depths, I think. So thanks. So I grew up in New Mexico, and my work is really affected by minimalism, but it's also affected by the landscape where I've spent most of my life. As most of you know, the landscape is pretty spare there, and the architecture's pretty simple. This is called Tent Rocks. If you've ever been to Santa Fe, you should so go there. It's volcanic ash. The sky's big, and the air is really thin, and that emptiness is it's in my bones at this point. It's really a part of me, and it affects my work in a really big way. So when I was in undergrad, when I was about 17, I came across this picture of this chair in my Jansen art history book. It was about 2 inches square, and I bet each of you had that experience at one point, looking in a book and seeing something. The art students have probably seen pictures of somebody's work, or someone yesterday said it was listening to Rachmaninoff, and there's somebody or a group of artists or musicians who speak to us in a way that it's like having an ancestor in a way, and Rietveld for me was that ancestor. So I looked at that chair. I think I even actually cut it out of the book, and just wanted to understand the geometry of it. And it wasn't actually until after Cranbrook that I got to go to the Netherlands. And while I was there, I was working at the European Ceramic Works Center in a residency program, and I got to go to the storage depots. You can do that in almost any museum; they'll let you go. And they would take the Tyvek covers off every piece of Rietveld furniture that they had in Utrecht, which was where he was born. And I could do anything I wanted with it as long as I didn't touch it. So I measured it, and I got down on my knees with it, and I saw one that had 3 1-centimeter holes in the back. And this is before artists were so tied to the photography of their work for the translation of it. This is not something that you would see in a photograph. It was so subtle. And so when I got back to the studio at the Work Center, I wanted to really understand what he was doing. And I know a lot of art historians have said it a million times before, but I think that he was taking the paintings of Mondrian and the other deSalle artists and rendering them 3-dimensional. So I wanted to take his chair and render it two-dimensional, and that's what I did. At the work center, they kept saying, aren't you going to put it back together? But I wasn't interested in that. I was really interested in the composition of it and that transition from three-dimensional to two-dimensional, and that has really followed me along in my work for a long time. I'm still really, really interested in that moment when something flat becomes dimensional, or when something dimensional becomes flat. So while at the work center, I started to investigate that, and I just started pouring flat sheets of porcelain and stacking them up, and how many would it take to make a form. And so for this piece, I calculated with my poor math skills that I'd need 1,000 shards to get my height, but I actually needed, I think, 608 shards. So we had a piece of steel bent to hold it, and it's 65 inches wide. And after that came kind of a further investigation of the shards. I worked with it for a number of years to just see what happens, like what happens when they tilt, what happens when they stack, how does one form become dimensional. And these are again related to the Rietveld chairs. They're half the half scale of the Rietveld chair. This is called angle of repose. It's related to the tilt on a hill before the rock, at the most tilt that a rock will roll. So it's just before the rock rolls, hopefully. And then this is the end presentation that I did at the work center. So this is the chair. This is the dust from the chair. Square of graphite and shards, and then drawings of the installations as I did them. You'll see one in the next slide. So I started really investigating the geometry of material and what happens when you order chaos. These are porcelain shards. And then this is a piece I did actually in the Kingswood Gallery with sandblasted glass. I don't know if Heather's here, but I spent a lot of days in the sandblasting booth in sculpture. It was kind of like being in Saudi Arabia on a windy day with outside air and a big suit. And but I wanted to get the immateriality and the materiality at the same time of beach glass, as the way it's kind of worn down by sand. And I just kind of speeded up the process. So once I got to 's-Hertogenbosch, I started with what I knew and made porcelain shards in the same formation as the glass. Then I took the glass to my gallery in San Francisco and reconfigured it. I was really, really interested in how to make order with these materials. So Malevich was another ancestor, and I saw this painting at the LA County Museum. They had a big show of his in the 80s, actually. And I was telling the students yesterday that I looked at this painting on the left for probably 6 months before I noticed that all the lines weren't parallel, in particular this one. So I really wanted to get I wanted to get it in my body and in my work, that same experience, like the way Malevich pulls a rug out from under the viewer. At first, all is calm and parallel, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's off. So I really wanted that kind of really subtle physical, visceral response to my work. So I think Malevich was really, really brilliant, and that they talk a lot about early installation art, but this is one of the putting this black square in the corner like that's one of the really early iterations of it. Agnes Martin, I went to see a lecture of hers in the 1980s, and I was telling the students yesterday that it was as if I was alone in the room and she was really only speaking to me. And I wanted to understand what she was doing, but not what she was physically doing so much as the kind of presence of mind that she had in making the work. And so it took me about a year to get up the nerve to call her, and when I did, I wrote out a script. And the first sentence she uttered differed from my script, so that I just stammered for about 5 minutes before she actually talked to me. But after that, she invited me for tea, and I would go every month and have tea with her. And she was, I almost didn't realize until afterwards how completely generous she was, that she took me into her life and into her studio. We'd go into the studio and she'd say, "Never let anybody in your studio," and I'd go in with her. And at the time I thought it was a contradiction, but what I didn't understand until later was that you have to be really careful about who you let into your studio. So as artists, I think we learn that slowly, but I think it's a really important lesson. So you guys know where this is on the left. And on the right, it's the first time I realized that landscape could be Baroque was when I came to Michigan. Eddie Dominguez, the ceramicist, came as a guest artist, and he leaned into me and he said, "How can you stand all the trees?" And for us in New Mexico, they're a little claustrophobic. So this is where my theory about the land that you grow up in really has an effect on you. I think just physically, some of you, I bet most of you are comforted by the presence of trees, but I bet many of you who might have grown up in the West are not comforted by the presence of trees, right? Being here at Cranbrook really helped me understand that in a bigger way. So this was my studio on Academy Way before they moved into the swanky new buildings. And I was really, when I first started, I was working with Tony Hepburn, and I had worked in clay for a long time. And the first day that I came in, he said, "Well, you're not going to be working in clay right now. You're not." And so I was like, "Great! I entered a ceramics program. I'm not going to be working in clay, and it's about the only thing I think I know how to do. So what am I going to do?" So I really struggled for weeks, actually. But what it helped me do was become a beginner again in a way that I hadn't been a beginner in a really long time. So I learned how to go inside myself in a really different way. So these pieces on the left are, as I was kind of like grappling, feeling like my arms had been cut off because I couldn't work in clay, I started going to these geometric forms that I'd been working with in clay, and basically I sieved them onto the floor in our crit room, and I used just chemicals from the glaze room and sieved these huge shapes, and it was the first time I didn't have to worry about hanging it up or even putting it in storage. So I actually told Agnes Martin about it the summer after my first year here, and she was like, "What do you mean you're making stuff that you can sweep up into a garbage bag? That is ridiculous. You're not going to have anything to sell." So eventually I made objects, but in the beginning it was such a relief to not have to make a thing. And on the left are some pieces I did in the wood shop and in the metal shop, and then these are aerial drawings, a lot like the ones that I did in the Netherlands. So at a certain point, we were asked to do a collaborative project in Pontiac, and it was the metals, fiber, and ceramics departments. So we were forced to collaborate, and none of us really wanted to, actually. We were all like, let us just stay in our studio and not do that. But so it was a building in Pontiac. Does anybody know what building this is now? Heather, do you know what building it is? I think it was an old stationery office or something. I don't know. Does anybody know what it is now? No? oh, you guys should rent it. It's an awesome building. So, so the project on the left, I was the leader of it, and I really wanted to make a floating column. So we found a brick factory that made wet brick, and they donated brick to us. And then somebody in metals made the interior structure, and so we cut them to fit this structure. And the column floats just not too far, not quite far enough in my view from the bottom of the floor, about a ½ an inch. But you could lean against it and it would move, which was a little surprising to some people. And then the piece on the right was led by my colleague Steve Bauer, and it's all separate pieces of wood pressed up and pressed down with car jacks. So then the next, I started doing these really obsessive pieces, just sanding plaster and getting them perfect, and I got really sick of that. And so I decided I wanted something bigger than me to take over, and so I decided to use gravity. So this is a latex balloon in a latex kind of diaphragm that I made so that the balloon wouldn't be flat when I was finished. And I made these spheres that were asymmetrical, that look like that. I had to make a lot of them, 50 to 100 of them to get 2 that I liked. But because I didn't want them to, I wanted them to be just barely off, not a lot off. And then this was my thesis show. So in the show, I was really trying to capture that same feeling of dis-ease that Malevich gets in his pieces, and one of the ways I did that was is Greg here from the museum? Hey, remember when I covered up the Saarinen molding with the wall? It was sort of half travesty and half intervention. But so I thought if we're going to build a wall, we might as well do something with it. So I tilted it about 4 inches from floor to ceiling. You can see that it goes a little further forward at the top. And what that did was it created this kind of a different kind of tension than a straight wall does when the glass went up against the wall. That made it a much more, well, to me, much more active. Some people didn't notice it at all, and other people felt it profoundly, I like to think. So this is a plaster-covered graphite ball, so it's the first time that I started working in graphite. And at one of the crits, one of my peers talked about the rock gardens, so I started investigating those, and came to understand a little bit about that compression of huge space in a small area. And I didn't get to Japan until about a year ago, when we got to spend time at Ryoanji, actually, with one of the head monk there came to New Mexico to practice Zen when we were again quite a few years ago. So we got to see him again and have time with that garden, and to understand a little bit more about the space and quality of quiet in those gardens. So I was thinking about that when I did the graphite rooms. I started covering these rooms in graphite, and I thought that I could just apply the graphite and then buy a car buffer at Walmart, and then the whole wall in half a day. But I did do that on one wall, and it looked like one of those drawings from the air, one of those airplane spray paint jobs. So I had to start again and reapply all the graphite, and I realized that I had to use sheepskin gloves to do it by hand, to polish it in the way that you do a drawing. For somebody else, car buffer might work, but for me, I really needed to use to do it by hand. So by the time I got done with this one in New Mexico, I wanted to cover the floor too, but they were like, "You're out of here. You've been here way too long." So for the next show, I got them to build a whole room in Chicago and then covered the floor. And this also had a sound component. I collaborated with a sound artist, Steve Peters. So Cranbrook taught me a little bit about collaboration and actually the lack of control that's needed, where the rug is pulled out from under you in a way that makes the work sometimes bigger than you are alone, but always different. So these are solid graphite pieces, some of the biggest ones I'd done up to that point. And then I took these to San Francisco for a show there, and I put one piece on the wall, which you can see. And that was when I realized that the graphite could be an object, a sculptural object, and it didn't have to just be installed. And that became really interesting to me. So I started investigating the composition and how to play with that on the wall. And then, if you might remember the Malevich piece, and this is a homage to that work. And then I just played, and I've been actually doing a lot of playing with the graphite since that time, of playing with it in relationship to each other, in relationship to the architecture, and then going up and down in scale. This is again a piece that tension that happens between the bottom of the piece and the floor, I think is really it's really palpable. And sometimes that tension happens within the geometry of the piece, and sometimes it happens in relationship, the piece's relationship to the architecture. This was a piece that was installed in a straw bale house, so they had to actually go through the entire wall to hold it up, because there's not a real internal structure on a straw bale house except the bales. So the posts that hold it up are about that thick. I'm really interested in the way the graphite melts into the environment. And you'll notice on this one that not all of the angles are right angles. This is a piece called Tilted Column that I did at the Lannan Foundation in Santa Fe, and it's completely a right angle when you come in, and then it twists a little on the back end that you're looking at. So this is a Dan Flavin piece that I saw in Los Angeles. It's the Nominal 3. Many of you are probably familiar with it, but it was one of the first times that he used architecture to work with his lights. It's just 3 lights, but in engagement with the room, and it's dedicated to William of Ockham, who many of you might know is a 14th century philosopher, and he said, "It is vain to do with more what can be done with less." And the Lannan Foundation also owned this piece, and they wanted me to do a project, and so I decided to do a piece in response to Nominal 3, and I called it 3 Columns. And it's 3 graphite columns, and they're in 6-foot segments. The top one, the ceiling is 14 feet high, so the top segment is 2 feet. But you can see that there's a circle back to Cranbrook on this one. You can see that the column is floating. And it's in that space between the bottom of the column and the floor that the main tension exists in the piece. We would have to polish it every weekend because people would kind of look around and come in and touch it, because the material is really evocative. And there are a lot of contractors in Santa Fe, and they would all swing it because it's a little bit like a pendulum. So there is something, as Reed said, about this material that has an infinite quality to it. It's not like looking at a wall and it stops, but all of you who are art students know from looking at a graphite pencil that if you look into the graphite and imagine it big, it's an amazing surface. Then I also did started doing drawings of these pieces, and because I'm a sculptor, I was making I made them in a direct response to the sculpture, and I actually made a template of this sculpture, and then laid it on the paper and traced it. And they're really dense. I mean, it's probably about 50 or 100 layers of graphite on there. When I work the paper, it's really physical, a lot like polishing the graphite. This is a piece that went through the wall at James Kelly in Santa Fe. It's about 5 feet long and about 500 pounds. And this is installing the piece. So it was really important to me that it be solid, that what you see is what you get. But a lot of people thought it was two different pieces. But for me, the importance of it is that it's the truth of the material and of the installation. These are the first pieces that I did. This is the first piece that I did that began with the graphite, or began with a drawing rather, and then I made a sculpture of the drawing. And it may be a little hard to read in the photo, but I assigned a thickness, a physical thickness, to the density of the graphite, to the value of the graphite. And what it did, the light would, people kept coming in and thinking that the top material that designated the paper was different from the material of the drawn portion. But it actually wasn't. It was just the way the light hits the thinner material. So it's a beautiful series. It felt like still feels like a breakthrough of a kind. So at that same time I was doing these drawings, and I started doing a collaboration. Arthur Z., who's a poet in Santa Fe who pretty much reads everywhere, but we had known each other for a long time, and I wanted the collaboration to work with somebody again and see where I would go with it, where we would go together. And so he's a very careful person, and he would come in with his legal pad and take notes. And I was doing these drawings, and I saw the horizon line as creating a tension, a different kind of tension depending on the rise and fall of this horizon line between this edge of the paper and the edge of the horizon. And as it rose, it would be a different feeling, and as it lowered, it would be a different feeling. So he would come back, and he's quite quick, actually. He would come back with a poem within a month or two, and I would read the poem, and I would understand hardly a word of it. And then this went on for about 1.5 years, and he finally had 11 poems written, all in response to my drawings. And I was like, crap, what am I going to do? Because I'm looking at we're collaborating, and I really wanted it to be an authentic collaboration. We didn't want it to be me illustrating his poems. And so I read the poems over and over, and gradually came to understand them. And what I came to see as really interesting to me and kind of key in the work were these points of tension that he'd put into his poems for the first time as a result of seeing my drawings. So I essentially, this is one of the diptychs here. I did 2 diptychs, and I asked him to, this is poem number 3, and I asked him to mark what he saw as the key point of tension, which is down here. And I marked what I saw as the key point of tension. You guys, is it big enough to see? Okay. So, so you can see that I did the first line, and he did much further down. And so basically what I did was just do it mathematically with, I just measured where this was in relationship to the whole poem and then in relationship to the paper. So this is a drawing of the first line, the geometry of the first line of tension. And his poems were just published in the Kenyon Review, not with any marks on them. This shows you the two drawings together of my line of tension marking and his line of tension marking. And this will be published in Radius Books is going to do a book of this project. This is my most recent project, and I've been I did a residency at the UCross Foundation in Wyoming, which Reed mentioned, and it's a 20,000 acre ranch, and I'm not super into ranches or the country. So I kind of wasn't looking forward to it, actually, except to have the time, and it was an amazing experience. There were 11 artists there, 3 writers, 3 musicians, 3 composers, and 3 artists. And then a 10th one would change between the 2. And you have your studio, and your lunch would be put at the door at noon. And then the only thing that you had to do was at 6, you had to go to the dining room where they would, the chef made everybody a meal, and you'd eat together. So I got so much work done. So I would get up right at as light came, and I would ride these bikes they gave us to the ranch. We stayed a little bit of ways to my studio, and then I would start the day drawing a circle. When I had gone to Japan, I've been trying to do a circle for a really long time, and I would cut these templates that I would then trace, because I often work with templates. But it doesn't work. Well, for me, it doesn't work to draw a circle unless, I suppose, it was laser cut. And then it just would have breaks in it. So when I went to Japan, I realized, even though I'd seen a lot of Sumier paintings, I realized that I could actually do that with a pencil. And so every morning I would draw one circle. So this represents, I was in residence for 26 days there, and this represents each day. So the museum this is a show at the museum in Santa Fe that just ended, and the curator really wanted me to show the drawings, but she also wanted me to show some sculpture. So I really needed of course, a sculpture to relate to the drawing, and as I continue to do this study of 2D to 3D, I wanted it to relate exactly to the drawing. So I imported the drawing into a 3D modeling program, and then drew a sphere over the circumference of the drawing. And then we have a small CNC machine, and it was actually milled then on the CNC machine. So I think it's really the closest translation that I've gotten yet between 2D and 3D. Although I have to say that the museum wanted to do a video, because I took about 4 hours adjusting the circle just so it lined up exactly right with the drawing. So this is the graphite piece, and you can see the shape of the drawing, and how they're really quite similar. And this is, not to make a pun, but it's a full circle. So this is the sphere that I did at Cranbrook, but the sphere at Cranbrook is made in a completely different way, made with gravity, and in essence, the sphere on the right is made as a drawing, and then turned into a sculpture. So I want to thank you guys for inviting me here, and to the department and the Academy for the award. It means a great deal. I think that I know there are alums in the audience, and there's longtime faculty, and the legacy of Cranbrook, we see it every day in the buildings, in the amazing Saarinen architecture, the angle of the roof to the angle of the wall, and the angle of the ceiling to the angle of the walls, and many of the buildings, and in the new additions, in the beautiful museum now. And then there's so many people in here who've spent their lives protecting Cranbrook. And then Greg has dedicated his whole career to working here and keeping not just a legacy, but the aesthetic alive and vital, and in refurbishing the buildings and keeping them going. And Reed and Anders and Heather and Bev and all the and the faculty have, through their work with you guys, with the students, keep it alive and growing, and you guys are making amazing work. But as we look at the thread, and I see my peers from here, and then the many who've come after me, I think it's quite, you know this, but it's such a remarkable place. The kind of depths that in the 2 years that the students are here, that you get to enter, and you get to find your own vision in many cases. You get to take risks and learn new skills, and tell the truth about your work, and tell the truth to other people about their work. And it's really important, and the level of community support that I know are in, I know the alumni committee is here, and the work that each of you do and what you give to it, it does more than affecting one generation. And the multi-generations are in this room, from supporters to alumni to administrators and staff. It's really important to keep this going, and I think it's easier to see it when you come in from the outside. And also when in your studio practice, which you guys will have the pleasure of doing when you graduate, the effect of the education here, it's a really unique education. It's not just going to classes. In fact, it's not going to too many classes. It's finding your own way, and understanding that way, and figuring out the tools that are going to help you get there. It's really unique, and I want to thank you all for keeping it going at such a profound level. Thank you.